Hi everyone, welcome to today's lesson. A bit more materials based this week. We're going to be looking at how to stretch a canvas. So a lot of people, when they're painting, they tend to buy pre-made canvases. And I just wanted to go through how you can make your own, because it can actually work out, if you're doing a lot of painting, can work out more economical. So if I'm working, I tend to buy stretcher bars. So they come in whatever sizes you like. Just drop them down. These are a little bit worn, but I'll go through how they connect together. But basically they're just going to slot into each other. It's like an IKEA flat pack type thing. So you can buy loads of sets of stretcher bars, and depending on how big they are, something this big would be like a pound or something like that. And then you can buy your linen separately. So this is a scrap I've got left over, but I'll tend to buy my my canvas in a big roll. So the biggest roll I've ever bought is about 10 meters or something like that. And it's quite expensive when you initially buy it, but it works out a lot better value over time. Which, if you're working professionally, is an important aspect. But even as an amateur, you can buy it by meter. So you could buy 2 meters of. Usually they come in 2 meter lengths of canvas, and if you bought a meter of that 2 meter ream, you get a 2 by 1 meter section of canvas, and that would make a lot of sort of smaller canvases if you're doing studies. And you can then make, say, a meter of it for good linen might cost you 50 quid or something like that, 45 quid. But you could get probably about 15 small canvases or something like that out of that section of linen. And it can be quite high quality, which means that even if it's 50 quid, you work out these, as I say, are only a few pounds each, and then you've got staples. We'll be going through the rest of the materials. You maybe spend about 4 to 5 quid per canvas or something like that, and then a similar canvas pre-made with that level of linen would cost you 15 or 20 quid. So it's a pretty substantial saving for not too much work, really. I have to excuse my cat. One of the hazards of working on the floor. He's gone off. So I'll just go through everything, all the tools that we're going to be using. So I've already spoken about stretcher bars. We'll be looking at how to put them together. With stretcher bars, you'll get these little wedges. You'll usually get 2 for each corner. I've only got 4, but it'll be enough to explain how they work. And they basically make this into a set of stretchers. If you don't have those, they're called strainers. So you could just make your own rectangle out of bits of wood this shape, staple or glue them together at each corner, stretch a piece of canvas over it, and that's called a strainer. The risk with that is that canvas is hygroscopic, I believe is the word, which means it reacts to the amount of moisture in the atmosphere and also temperature. So if you were to stretch a piece of canvas in a very hot place, it would be really tight, and then you might take it somewhere quite cold and wet, or you might ship it somewhere. Suddenly it'll be completely floppy because the fibres of the linen or the cotton will stretch and tighten depending on the environment. And if you've got stretchers, what you can do is you use these little wedges. We'll have a look at this later. You can use these little wedges to tap out the stretchers, which can expand, basically expands the stretcher and tightens the canvas like a drum. Something else we'll be looking at. So you've got your little wedges, that's what they're for, and that's how the stretchers work. We've got our linen. So first thing I'll be doing is measuring, I'll build the stretcher, and then I'll be measuring the linen and cutting it to size. We'll talk about that in a moment. Will then be using this mallet. Is useful for making sure that when you put your stretch bars together they go straight. Another useful thing for getting the stretch bars to be straight is a right angle or a set square, which we'll be using for the corners, so you can check all your corners and make sure they're square. If they're not square, when you stretch, you'll end up with a wonky canvas. Usually you can do it by eye roughly accurately, but if you weren't framing, it can be an issue if something's not dead straight. And finally, I've got most important tools are a staple gun, although you can actually use tacks, but I definitely recommend a staple gun. This is a rapid one. They cost about 15 or 20 quid. think the cheapest one's £12 off Amazon, and they're Swedish made. They're very good quality, and you can get staples in different lengths. So you basically pop your staples into there. So I recommend short staples because they're easier to remove. So very often you might need to stretch or unstretch and re-stretch your canvas, say you're shipping it or something like that. Happens a lot to me. And if they're shorter, they're just easier to remove. It's annoying to remove them otherwise. And finally, probably the most specialist tool are these canvas. They're called canvas pliers, and you can get them from most art shops, decent art shops. And they basically get it in the center. Try to get it to focus. Does not want to focus. Let me change my setting. That worked. It's still not focusing. Let me try manually. Just so you can get, I wanted to get a good look at these. There we go. That's better. So you can see it's got these basic little grips, metal grips inside, and they, when you sandwich them together, they grab the linen, and they allow you to put a lot tighter than you can with your hands. So you can pull with your hands, but I don't recommend it. It's a lot of work. Sometimes when you're doing really big pieces, it's okay because you can get a big sort of fistful of the canvas, but when you're working on something, try to go back to autofocus. That seems to be working okay. Yeah, so if you're working with a small canvas, you want to be able to use these pliers because it gets fiddly, as you'll see in a moment. So first thing I'm going to do is build my stretchers. So I'm going to move the linen aside for a moment. Oh, one last thing about linen actually is when we're talking about stretching and tightening, you'll find that good quality linen changes shape a lot less than cotton. So a lot of people will use cotton canvases because they're cheap. Searching a bit now, there we go. A lot of people use cotton canvases because they're cheap, but they can be quite a lot of hassle, and they can crack your paintings quite badly. So I'd always recommend spending a bit more and going for linen. It's a nicer surface to paint on as well. It's got a nice crispness to it. This is oil primed linen, which is particularly nice to work on, but universal primed linen works well as well. Obviously if you're working in acrylic, you'd want universal linen. So I'll try to make sure I work in the center here. So if we start assembling our stretchers, you can see you need the same sides, same length sides matching each other. So just mark out where my boundaries of this video are so that I'm a bit more accurate. About there. Something like that, isn't it? And then just pop these. Yeah, they're okay. So I know to work in there. So if we lay them out, you can see they make a rough rectangle, and obviously if they're square they're all the same size, but you match the two sides together. The other thing I want you to notice is there's a bit of a lip. So all canvases, stretchers will have this sort of, sorry it's a bit blurry, but they basically have a ridge on one side, or they slope down. You want that to face out, so your linen wraps over the top of that, and the reason being, it means a lot less of the linen touches the stretcher in the surface. So some of them just kind of angle back down, they kind of slope back away from the linen. But the main thing is, if you were to do it this way, then the linen would sit flat and you'd end up with this kind of horrid ridge along the canvas when you stretch it tight. So this, it's more like a drum edge. Again, we're going for something drum-like with our linen. So the first thing you do is, you can see these match. So they're cut by a machine so that they slot into place, and then they make a 45-degree angle. So pretty easy, you can see, just slot straight in. If they're well made, they're really easy to do. Then I can do it with this one. At this point I recommend not pushing it all the way in, because you're going to now have to slot this top one in. So I'm just making sure you can see what I'm doing. So you see it's pretty much by hand I could do that, but if you struggle, this is the point where you use the mallet, so you can tap everything down with the mallet. And generally, if you get these sort of roughly flat, they'll make for a right angle. So it's not so crucial actually with this one that we tap it in, but you'll find with big canvases you might need to use something like a mallet. The reason I use a wooden or rubber mallet is it won't dent the wood. If you use something metal, you're liable to start cracking or denting the wood, which isn't nice. So it's not actually entirely straight. Looking at it by eye. So I'm going to now use my right angle, and you should be able to see it's not too bad there. So you just go around each corner, see how it fits. You can make minor adjustments. As I say, it's not too vital if you're going to be framing, because the frame will hide any imperfections as far as that's concerned. But if you are leaving it unframed, you want to be pretty precise with your corners, so they're nice and rectilinear. So the next thing I'm going to do is lie my canvas over my, put my stretchers over my canvas, and we obviously are going to want a reasonable amount of the canvas to wrap around. So you'll notice this in pre-bought canvases, although sometimes they do trim right up to the edge. But we need enough canvas that we'll be able to get some purchase and stretch it. So I would usually say you want at least probably triple the width of the stretcher bar, so you get different widths of stretcher bars. Some are quite thick, some are quite thin, and obviously some of the canvas will be lost around the stretcher bar as it wraps over, and then you need enough to get purchase, so about 3 times that. So in this instance, the minimum I would want is about there. Let's use this. There, that's 3. So the minimum is probably about that much, but I've got a little bit more than that, which is good. So I'm just going to go for the same all the way around, because I've got more canvas, excess canvas at the top here. I'm just going to draw across there, so that's about the same width. Get rid of this, and then just get my scissors, and it's like cutting fabric. Well, literally is cutting fabric. So we've now got our piece of linen cut to size. Generally I'd recommend doing it on a cleaner surface than the floor of your studio, but this is what I had free. Maybe the tables were taken up otherwise. So next thing you do is you lie the linen face down, and then you put your stretcher bars with that ridge face down as well. So it's the flat side that we're stapling to. And we're going to work in a particular pattern that I was taught, because apparently it makes for the most even stretch. Because one thing you want to watch out for when you're stretching your own canvas, probably the trickiest bit, is overstretching. So you could maybe stretch too much on this left hand side compared to the right hand side of the canvas, or along this way, and it can create torsion in your canvas, and then that ends up with like a rucking effect. It's less likely to happen on a small canvas, but it's a problem on a bigger canvas. So I'm going to teach you the way that you should do it in a big canvas. But when you're working a small one, you can just tack pretty much any way, which way you want. There are 2 different ways that you can staple. So the first thing that you can do is, if you're exhibiting the painting without a frame, you don't want staples showing on the edge, and that means that you're going to have to then stretch like this, and then staple on the total back of the canvas. You'll see some of these as well, and sometimes when you buy them in shops they're like that anyway. If you're doing that, you might need a little bit extra canvas, so bear that in mind. You're going to have to be able to get grip, then flatten the canvas out and staple all at the same time. If you're stapling to the edge because you know it's going to be framed, then you don't have to be so fussy. You can just you can have less linen like we will today and just staple along the edge, which is what we're going to be doing. And that's easier to get a good tight grip on as well. So I generally, unless you're really set on exhibiting without a frame, I generally recommend just using the edge because it's easier. But the rule is we're going to start from the center at each side and work in one direction and one direction. So basically we're going to be working from the center here down and alternating sides. At the same time working the center here and alternating sides. So you'll see this work. But basically we staple this way, and we staple that way, and we staple that way and that way. And that supposedly creates the most even type of canvas, and generally, in my experience, that's the case. So we're going to put our first staple in, and for this one you actually might find it easier to just put a staple.
Check. Yep.
So basically we're lying canvas flat down, we can put our staple against it, staple it in, and there we go, got our first staple in.
So as I say, the next thing that we want to do is
pull towards us.
the other thing you want to generally do is you want your staples to get tighter as you work. So I'm just using my hands for this first one, so I'm pulling quite tight, getting a bit of tension in it, then holding here, so holding it secure, and popping my staple in the top of the canvas. And it didn't actually go all the way in, sometimes that happens, but what you can do is just get your tack hammer, which we'll be using later, and just lightly tap that in to make sure it's flat. So we've now got our two ends here stapled in, and as I say, the next thing we're going to do is go to the middle on this side. So one other thing you can do is we're going to be having to do a sort of hospital style fold. This is the other tricky bit. So with our folds, we can put these in place to begin with, just because it means you have less messy canvas sitting around. So basically we want to pull this side in and then wrap the top over, something along those lines. So that's how each of our corners will be. So I'll do it again. I'm pulling that side in and wrapping that over, and it's quite similar to making a bed, as I say, for anyone who's got experience of that sort of thing. So same thing, I'm going to pull the inside and then rock that up and pull over. You can be a bit neater than this, but this is generally sufficient. So we've got all those wrapped in, which means now when I'm shifting it around, it can be a little bit neater, because otherwise it gets in the way sometimes. So I'm going to go here again, get my stretching pliers. So my stretching pliers, they grip the canvas there, and then pull down reasonably hard, pop a staple in, flip, do the same thing again. So now I've got a staple in each corner, each center of each stretcher. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose to work this way. Doesn't matter if you work this way or that way, but you just want to work in a single direction. So I'll leave a few centimeters, get a good grip here. So I tucked that linen, so I got my stretchers all the way to the edge, because I've got this little thing here, which, if it sits on the lip of the stretcher, is a bit more effective. You get a bit more leverage, so you see I get more tension that way. Put about an inch between them. I'm going to do them quite close, just so you see me do quite a lot of different staples. Flip over, and so we're working in the same direction. I'm going to work this way, so do the same thing. Put an inch, So you can, as you're working, you kind of check. You can hear there it's got a little bit of tension, which is nice. So I've done one on either side there. I'm going to flip up here, and I'm going to work same direction, so I'll work that way. Try to keep this in camera. I'll basically be doing the same thing. So get some tension. It doesn't matter too much if your staples face the same direction, in case you're wondering. It's not a vital thing. So get up tight here. Get some more tension. I've actually changed my mind about that. I might gonna get rid of that staple. Sometimes they get in the way of it. I'm gonna restaple the top, this top side. That's a bit better. So I've now got working in that direction this way, that direction that way. So I'll go back to the side. So it's a little bit of work keeping track of what's going on, but it's worth it. Makes it work more efficiently, and you won't have to correct anything. It can be tedious. If you get anything wrong and you end up with rocking, you're going to have to unstretch it and then redo it again. So it's not the end of the world if you get it wrong, but it can be a bit of a hassle. So pop a staple in there. Go to this side. Pop a staple in there. So almost at the corner. This time we're going to get to the corner because it's such a small canvas. You can see how quick it is to do one this small. It can be more time consuming obviously with bigger ones. And can take a little bit more strength as well, so the stretching pliers take a little bit of the hassle out of the work, but not entirely. So now I've got up to that corner. I'm going to leave this final one because this final one is going to be to stretch the corner. So pretty much done both those sides, and you can hear it's already got a decent amount of tension. And if I flip it over, you can see it's already quite smooth. But as I say, it's quite an easy small canvas to work on. I'm going to pretty quickly go through the other side, doing the same thing. So work an inch out. 1, 2, back up to the top. 1, 2, down to the side. 1, 2, and finally do these top ends. 1, 2. So we've got to the corners now. So we'd already roughed them in, didn't we, earlier? So it's going to be quite easy to do. If you hadn't done that already, this is the point at which you create those tucks. So I'll just redo them here. I'm going to make sure the center here is pulled in because sometimes you can get a bit of slope. Just get that tightened and go into the corner. Grab everything that you've tucked, give that a good pull, and staple your corner. Do that on the opposing side. And then you can do it at the other end. Exactly the same approach. And this is our final stretching staple. There we go. So we've got that completely stretched, and you can see if I tilt it away from us, we don't have any sort of lines or stretches on the canvas at all, which is really nice, which is a perfect surface to work on. The last thing I'm going to do is lie it flat
and you don't need the stretching pliers anymore, I am going to just go through and, you can see, just tack down this excess linen. And you can do these corners as well, depending on how neat you need it to be. It's usually good to do the corners though. So that's it. We've got our canvas stretched. There are a few finishing things that we can do. One being popping our little wedges in. And I was just trying to see, yeah, I should be able to reach it. Sometimes when you put the canvas, this canvas is actually quite deep, because I gave myself a lot to stretch. It can be difficult to reach the corners, but basically what we're looking for, if you can see, are these little slots here. So I'll try to make sure you can see what I'm doing. As I say, I've only got 4 of them, but what you want to do is, as you put them in, you want them to face so that they angle down basically from the edge, because otherwise they're harder to hammer in. But you can see I've just popped it in that slot, press it down, do it on this other side, so pop it in the slot, press down, and you'll see there's always 8 slots on every, end up being 8 slots on each canvas, each set of stretchers. I'm just going to put 4 in because that's sufficient. And it's already very tight, this canvas. It wouldn't actually need, at this point you want to tap them in because they might be needed at some other point. As I say, if you were to stretch this in a certain condition and then suddenly it got shipped somewhere, it might be a bit different. So you want them in place that they can be used. But you hear, one way to test is if you kind of tap the surface of the canvas, you get a feel for how tightly it's stretched. So we've got our stretchers in place, and if I give them a bit of a tap, you'll hear how tight it sounds. I'm going to make it tighter just for the sake of this demonstration. So you'll see if I get my little tack hammer and just tap quite hard on all these sides and stretch it out even further. As I'm tapping, I can hear it starting to get even tighter, the linen. So now if I give it a tap, you can see it's almost tight as a drum. You can go a bit too tight sometimes. It is possible apparently to rip canvas. They're not the easiest thing in the world to do. But depending on how hard you stretch it to begin with and how tight you tap it in, it can rip, so watch out for that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So there's 2 ways you can tighten a canvas. The first is to use the wedges. Obviously they only work to a certain extent, so you don't want it to be too loose and have to rely on the wedges, because then after a certain point you can't tap them in any further and they don't make a difference. But usually you have a reasonable amount of stretching potential, but you want to get it as tight as possible before ever using the wedges, because the wedges are your kind of last resort to make sure it's tight. Well, actually there is, so the other thing that you can do apart from wedges is you can actually spray water on the back of the canvas. And as I say, because they're hygroscopic and they react to water, that can stretch a canvas out. So if you've got any extra little wrinkles that you're struggling to get rid of, you can try just using a kind of damp sponge or spraying the canvas, and it'll really rapidly start to stretch again, which can be useful as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So that's how you stretch a canvas. It's not too hard, particularly these smaller ones. I recommend starting with small and working your way up to bigger. They can be quite a lot of work, big canvases, but that's where the biggest saving is. You'll get charged a lot by a company to make any kind of decent canvas for you, and it's a really good skill to learn generally. But yeah, that's it. Hopefully that was useful. As always, if you have any questions, just post them below. And you can sign up to the OCAD school as well to get private tuition. But otherwise, I will see you guys soon.